start anyway, right? We have a quorum, so.
Yep.
Okay. I was just gonna peek, that's fine.
Okay, it is 3 o'clock. We will call the regularly scheduled Hutchinson Utilities Commission meeting to order. Anyone have a conflict of interest to declare?
No.
Nope.
No conflicts? All right, we'll move right on to the consent agenda. Anyone have anything you want to pull out of the consent agenda? We'll entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion by Matt, second by Bob. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed. All right, financial statements. Jeremy.
So just a couple things to note. We kind of talked about it last month that June was shaping out to be a pretty good month on the electric side just because it's been warmer. So you can see that the June numbers have come back on the electric side. We're about 6% up over last year. A lot of it was in obviously the residential side with a lot of air conditioning going on in June, and we'll see the same trend in July just because it's been hot. So load's back up. So really year to date, for the most part, we're almost back to where we were at 2019 levels, at least through half of the year. Again, still down a little bit on the commercial sector, the small general, large general, so a little bit behind there, but ultimately things are looking pretty good. Couple of notes that are in the notes section just to highlight. In the other revenues section for June, that was a lot of that insurance claim money that we got. So that's why you'll see that area is significantly higher in revenue than what we typically have for the month. So we got about $240,000 in insurance claim money, and we're still working through that process. And Mark has sent out a letter to both insurance companies to keep that process moving forward. And then just wanted to highlight that the Rice Lake utility capacity contract started in June of this month, so that goes out 20 years with a 10-year potential, an additional 10 years if we want to, so 30. So that starts now, and that will go for a few decades, so that's good. So that looked good. And then the other piece I just wanted to note is for June, we pulled $145,000 in some odd cents out of the rate stabilization fund in the electric division. So if you look at the balance sheet, that rate stabilization fund is now below the minimum threshold of $400,000. We're down to like $259,000 left in there. So as I mentioned last week, that means that there will start to become power cost adjustments moving forward for sure for July's usage, which we billed in August, and August usage, which we billed in September, and then depending how the fall rates shape up when they dip down with the wholesale supplier, there may or may not be some, but you can expect, at least for a while now, the power cost adjustments will be back on since we've used money to cover the power supply costs the last couple months. And then really on the gas side, nothing. I mean, obviously because it was hotter in June, that means gas sales were down, so we were below the 19 June numbers overall. But overall, everything's looking really good for the most part, and kind of moving back towards normal trend here through the first of the year. So things are looking okay there. And then just on the investments, I just wanted to mention that we had, if you look at the investment report, we had 3 CDs that were called here at the end of July. I just got notified yesterday from Wells Fargo, so some of those that were callable on July 29th and July 30th, all 3 of those got called yesterday, and those are all 2%. So, it just goes to show you where the interest rates are at, that people are calling 2%. And so we'll look to reinvest those into something. But that's what I have on the financials and investment report. Any questions or any concerns from any of the board on where things are at?
Any questions at all?
Okay.
Entertain a motion to approve the financial statements.
I'll make the motion to approve it.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Bob and second by Matt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That brings us to the open forum. I do not see any visitors here today. And on to communications. Anything to cover for divisions today, Jeremy?
No, other than we had a little outage here this morning down on Main Street. I'm sure some of you guys noticed that. We had 3 commissioners that worked on the west side of the street, so I'm sure there was a little bit of it. But we just had
I was fine.
You were fine, yeah.
Your problems are.
How many commissioners are down there? But we had a 3-phase fault which was right over by Peace Lutheran and Little Lambs there. So the three-phase faulted, so it tripped one of our junction boxes. So the power went out for about 10 minutes completely, and then most of it came back up on 2 phases, and so most people didn't see any blinking, but there were a few people, like I think Peace Lutheran and Little Lambs had a blink off and on for another about a half hour, and then by 11 o'clock everything was back up. So they've traced the fault back, so they know where the fault occurred, so they're gonna dig that up and see if it's just bad underground wire, or if we're gonna splice it in or just put out a new conductor in that area. So that happened this morning. So I got a few calls on that, but we got that resolved. And otherwise, projects are going as planned with the weather, and maintenance is going as planned. Generation sort of things, both all of our units are running off and on. We're cycling those on as well, and we've been running the big unit off and on too, and we've been running both the combined cycle there. So when we run the boiler system on that combined cycle, we get down to about 8.8 heat rate, which is real comparable to the generating units downtown. So we've been running that for some market sales off and on when we can. So otherwise, just a lot of maintenance and upkeep and capital things are going to be going on now with some repairs and some fixes at both production and then production facilities, and then also in our distribution system. So things are moving along. We've had good weather, so a lot of the projects and things are going along. So that's kind of where things are at for the related division stuff. So,
On the generation side, Jeremy, are you generating more now than what you thought you would be up to date on this during this summer?
yeah, we actually thought we'd generate a little bit more. We got into a couple of those weeks where it was hot. We thought we were going to be able to run those all the way through the week until like Friday, and then shut those down. And then prices were pretty good through a couple of those weeks, Monday through Wednesday. And then Thursday afternoons, a lot of those prices kind of dipped down, so we ended up shutting them off a day or two early. But we anticipated running them 2 to 3 days a week, as long as the prices give us a 20 or 25% margin, or that margin that we're looking at. We'll run those things. Again, with that big unit, which is 40 megawatts or 50, when we have the combined cycle, you can push a lot of power to the market and capture a lot of the pricing. The only downfall to that combined production facility is you don't like to turn it on and off, right? It's not designed to do that like the ones downtown are. So that's kind of the negative to pushing that unit into the market, is once it's in, we're gonna let that thing run for 4 to 6 hours at a time, or 8. So when we capture a lot of the high prices, or maybe somewhere we don't capture real high prices, or we actually dip downward, we maybe lose a little bit of money, but in the end we make it. So we're right about where we anticipated. We thought we'd be July. We thought we'd run it a little bit more with some of the hot weather, but the market prices have been pretty stable and have been pretty flat again. When it's windy, we see the markets fluctuate in the MISO market just because of a lot of the wind in MISO, which a lot of energy markets don't have as much wind penetration as we do here in the MISO market. So when it's hot, so we see that a little bit softer market prices. But when it's not windy and it's hot, we'll see some $100 megawatt hours, some 80, some 90. So we'll capture a lot of that stuff as well. So we're about where I would say 90% where we thought we would run that unit this year so far. And we've been running the downtown ones for our hedging in town, and running that when we need to. Although our loads haven't been, I think our peak load to date so far has only been 48 megawatts. And I think when I first started here 6 years ago, I think our peak was 58 to 60. So even our peak loads aren't as high. And I think on that one day where we've had our peak at 48, 16 megawatts was 3M. So a third of our peak load on that particular day was one customer. So they've been running a bit higher than typical. They're running right now on average 12 to 13 megawatts an hour on average, which is 1 or 2%, 1 or 2 megawatts above normal. So they've been running some additional capacity over there with some of the production, but overall, plenty of, with our distribution systems, we talked about plenty of capacity there for where our loads are at, and we got it built out well for increased capacity down the road. So that's kind of where we're at.
Very good. Any other questions? All right, Mark, do you have anything?
Nothing today.
All right. Anything for yourself, Jeremy?
No, that's it for now.
Okay. All right. Policies, looks like we had some that were up for review, but no recommended changes.
Correct.
So that gets us into new business. And item A, looks like this is yours, Mark. The readoption of the Data Practices Act and Public Records Request Policy.
Yep, so
As you know, people in Minnesota have the right to request records from public entities, and we have a policy that deals with that. The state statute requires us to have a policy and readopt that policy prior to August 1st of every year. And the policy that we have talks about how people can make requests for information, how that information is classified, what types of formats they can get that information, how much that information might cost, reasons why they might not be able to get information. There's a section in there that talks about how there are some different rules if the information is about yourself as opposed to information that's not about yourself. So we have some different rules that we have to follow if we get a request like that. But basically it just sets out a roadmap how people can get information, what information they can get, and how much it's going to cost, if anything. There aren't any changes from last year. So I would ask that you approve it unless you have any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the commission? All right. Anybody care to make a motion?
I'd make a motion to readopt the Hutchinson Utilities Commission data practices policy.
Second.
A motion by Anthony and second by Matt. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mark. Next, we have the, to approve the continuity of operations plan. That one's yours, Jeremy.
So this plan, we originally had an older plan, which was called the pandemic influenza plan. That was one that was put in place back in 2010. I don't think we could find anything where there was a formal board approval for that particular plan. I think it was more of just an internal business plan and protocol plan. But obviously with the things that have been going on, most recently with COVID-19, it was a good time to update that plan and make it more of a broad continuity of operation plan. That's kind of the terminology being used today, more so than pandemic plan. It's more encompasses more than just a pandemic or an influenza plan. It could be other things that come up. So we took some time to go back through that, adjust that with really the latest information that we've collected from the CDC, the Department of Health, the latest guidelines and protocols that should be put in place for a business such as ours and how we're going to operate under times when we have emergencies or situations that come up where we will need to protect the workforce predominantly to make sure that we're providing the essential services. Because since we are listed as critical employers with employees here that are essential to the makeup of the economy, we got to make sure that we're taking the proper protections and putting the proper protocols in place to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to protect the employees here so they go out and do their work to make sure that the hospitals and the clinics and different frontline workers have the electricity and the power that they need to run those operations. So what I sent you guys about a month ago was kind of the revised continuity of operation plan. It's a fairly lengthy document, so I wanted to make sure I got it out in plenty of time for you guys to take a look at that. But I think it's important for the board to adopt, that plan formally. It shows support from the staff standpoint that the board recognizes that it's important to have a continuity of plan in place. This plan will really be in conjunction with a lot of the additional things that I send out more periodic, those memos and more of those fine-tuned protocols that we're going to put in place depending on what the situation is. But this is more the broad encompassing document that I think we need to have in place here. And we'll adjust those things on an annual basis if things change at the CDC, if things change at the Department of Health, if there's other things that we need to incorporate in this plan to make sure that we're as current as possible. We'll bring those things back to you on an annual basis and recommend changes to it. So hope you guys have at least had a chance to skim through a bunch of that stuff. There was a section in the back where we label our positions as what type of position they are, whether they're critical to the business or a non-critical. That's an important piece, I think, for you guys to make sure you understand that when I'm defining critical employee, I'm defining it as the essential makeup of making sure that we can get the power back on and the gas is flowing. And so the people that you see, which are typically people in our production facilities or people out in the field that have to get the power back up and running, those are what the CDC, what the federal government, what the Department of Health, what the state of Minnesota list as the critical employees. So we're following most of those guidelines there with that. Not that everyone doesn't have a critical component in the business and provide some responsibility to the organization in times like that. But again, I'm looking at the critical as a definition of who are the people that have to get the lights back on if the power goes out, and who are the people that if we have a natural gas leak or we have something that's a safety concern or health issue, or the hospital needs heat out there, who are the people in their positions that are going to come and make sure that those things get put back in place. So that's how I'm defining it, just so you guys are aware of that piece. And so that's an important piece for you guys, just to make sure you kind of read through that and know that's how I'm defining it. Certainly if there's questions or different viewpoint on that, let me know. If you have talked to the managers about that definition and those layers of employees in situations. So obviously some of those different layers of employees also dictate how we operate here as far as what people can work from home, what people don't have to, be here. If there's quarantining procedures, what precautions are taken in different situations. So it's a long document, but I think it was needed. It needed to be updated. It needed to be more in line with today, with where we're at, not only our operation, but where guidelines are at. So I'll just leave it at that. And if there's any particular questions on it, just open to it. I didn't receive any questions on it or any major concerns about it. But if there's any questions, let me know.
Bob, questions?
No, it's like you said, it was a big document, there's a lot of information in there, but it's slightly easier to write this document having been through the pandemic
It is,
to some
yeah.
extent. So you learn a little bit in hindsight that you can apply to the policy, I guess, is
Right.
my only comment.
Yeah. And I think it's important that it is looked at annually. Situations change. You never know what the next thing might be, but it needs to be a working document, and it seems very comprehensive to me. So.
And if we learn something as this stuff goes along, that we can incorporate in with another revision, we'll make sure we do that, let you guys know that, so.
We're certainly smarter about pandemics than we were 6 months ago.
Yeah, whether you want to be or not, right?
Unfortunately, we are.
Yeah. Matt, any questions, comments?
No, I would make a motion to approve the Hutchinson Utilities Commission Continuity of Operation Plan.
Second.
All right, motion by Matt and second by Anthony. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, items C and D we need to table. We are still waiting for a key piece of those, I think the insurance piece, was it?
Right.
Correct, yep.
So we're likely looking at a special meeting to review those in the near future. But for now, I'd entertain a motion to table both items C and D in the transformers.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Anthony and second by Bob to table items C and D. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that takes us to item E, approve requisition 8478, CE Power Plant Number 2 Substation Improvements.
So this is the requisition that, kind of mentioned over the last couple of months that was going to be coming. And so this is kind of the prep work for the site up there to start the engineering and professional services design work to get that site ready for the transformers, the weight of the transformers, the size of the transformers, and the reconfiguration up there. So we're asking the board to approve the requisition 8478 to allow CE Power to start the preliminary design work on the layout and the engineering that needs to be done prior to those transformers coming. I think as we move along, I think we kind of talked about that we would anticipate trying to get a lot of this stuff done in the fall here and get the site ready to go. So that the transformers, when they do come, we can put those on the pad. The last I'd heard about the transformers, they thought if we can get this contract signed, that they even might be able to get us in the queue and have these things done by December. So,
Oh, wow.
so they asked if they're done in December, do you want them out here to do the installation, or do you want to wait till the spring? And so they're still working through logistics on that. Of course, the first step is making sure that we've got the sites ready to go, and so that's what's in front of you today is the requisition to start that process for the design work up there.
Okay. Questions from the commission?
With the tabling of the last two agenda items, is there any reason that or do you have any concern, Jeremy, about moving ahead with this proposed requisition, knowing that we just tabled the prior two?
No, because the only piece that we're waiting on is just the $1 value on the certificate of insurance.
So the specs aren't changing or
No.
anything like that?
No, and this is a common issue that we have with certificate of insurance with bids is they don't wanna follow the state statute guidelines for us, and so they think their umbrella $2 million aggregate policy covers the $1.5 million per occurrence liability, and it doesn't, and so that's something we said, no, you gotta meet the bid specifications that were in the document that were clearly laid out, so they're working on revising that insurance certificate. So I don't have any concerns at this point.
Okay. Good, good question. Anything else?
None.
All right. Anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve requisition 8478.
Second. Go ahead.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Bob and second by Anthony. All in favor of approving requisition 8478, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Takes us to item F, which is our solar array discussion.
So I hope you guys had a chance, I sent out something a week ago, I think it was about a week ago, just some revised numbers. I know some of you had probably seen, or at least had discussions about some of the other numbers that came in from one of the other developers, and so I didn't have that put together when I met with a few of you, and so I wanted to give you guys just some revised numbers on where it's looking at least right now with the two developers that we've talked to that do utility scale solar systems. I've met, with all the individual commissioners and kind of went through some of the legal logistics of it, some of the financing structures that could be put in place, some of the structures that you could have, whether you self-funded or a PPA structure. And so what I sent you was, again, just some bullet points on really where we think, if we would go for an RFP process, where we think we could get the price per kilowatt hour to be. The numbers that we got back from the developers, they say those are pretty solid numbers, that they're not gonna change a whole lot anytime soon. The material costs are down to about $1.25 to $1.75 per watt now, so they've come down about 300% from about 4 or 5 years ago when we were looking at these solar arrays. So what we talked about originally was a 5 megawatt system and a 1 megawatt system. Part of those conversation points was because in order to get a tax equity investor involved, you had to have a system, at least a megawatt in place for those tax equity partners to get involved and take advantage of the investment tax credit. Through some conversations, I think there was some concern about going that big right away at the beginning because there would be some surplus energy coming off of that solar array that wouldn't be consumed either by the EDA or the city's high retail rate facilities down there. And then what would we do with that excess? Would we put it in our own power supply and pay a little bit more for it than what our wholesale cost is at that point? When we were looking at a PPA structure, would we design some additional programs off of that, where we're at? So based on some of that feedback and with some of the commissioners and just looking at some different options, we pared it back down and say, okay, if we just wanted to start with the original solar array that would provide enough power for the EDA and the city's facilities, what type of system would that look like? So we got down to the 600 to 700 kW system would provide power needed, or the output off of that solar array for those two facilities. And then if we wanted to add on to that solar array over time, if we wanted to do a community solar garden, or we wanted to just add more renewables and solar in town, we could do that and keep adding on with the space that we have up there that's been provided. So we pared it back down. The information that I resent you guys, I've pared it back down to more of a 600 to 650 kW system. I think two examples are a 625 system and the other two are a 660 system. And I mirrored that against the PPA structure of around $68. So you can see that it's more advantageous to not get into a PPA structure with a third-party developer, to essentially self-fund a solar array, through one or a couple different option mechanisms to get the price point down, even below what our wholesale power costs are. So that's a conversation point for the board to consider if you guys want to move forward on something, is what type of financing structure do you want to be, what type of size, scaled system if you want to be. Monty did mention, I had asked him because I knew he wasn't going to be here today, he just said his only comment he made is that it's, that we're transparent about if we're going to do a solar project up here, that we're transparent about the energy or the rate or the pass-through or the energy savings that we're providing to the EDA and the city, that's transparent, that we're doing it for some of those reasons, in conjunction with just providing some renewables into the local economy here, by HUC, because we're in the business, so you just wanna make sure that, we're up in front about some of that stuff, so. But there's a lot of different programs we've talked about individually that you can mirror out of a solar array system. I won't go into, we talked a lot about the legal details. The approach that we would need to take if the board wanted to move forward is we would look to do an RFP process and just solicit, essentially a turnkey project, someone that would come in, develop it, manage it, have a warranty behind it for that size of system. If we wanted to add on smaller array systems over time because we wanted to add some additional programs in town, we think we can do that in-house with the staffing we have here. Our staff will be walking hand in hand with the larger array system, and so it'd just be about adding more panels, in and then just doing the connection. The other piece we talked about was we probably would look at a ballast system versus a solar array system that's got ground penetration. So we originally, when we looked at that type of system, we were looking at more of concrete blocks that were penetrating the ground with a pole and then the solar panel sitting on top of that. The problem that you run into with that type of system is you end up having to stay away from the 50-foot easement on the transmission line, or it becomes more problematic because if we have to get in there on that pipeline on that lot up there, then we're gonna have to take all that stuff out. We're gonna have to excavate the ground out, we're gonna have to move all that stuff out, so it becomes more tedious. Whereas if we do a ballast system similar to what is done at the wastewater plant, where you're not putting in the penetration into the ground, we can run over the top of that easement and we can get all of a solar array system on that one lot. So that's probably the system we would go, is we'd look to do an RP on a ballast system where it's non-ground penetrating. We can use that entire lot up there to run a system. And if we wanted to add on, we have some lots or some land just west of that, between that lot and our generating facility, that you could add some community solar on, or some smaller array systems or whatever on there. And then we also, over time, with the EDA has some additional parcels if you wanted to continually add more on. But I think those things can be phased approaches to things that can be added on if the board wants to have more renewables in town from that regard. So that's kind of encompasses a lot of conversation points we've had, trying to get back down to what probably the best size project is for the best price is kind of what you're seeing in those sheets that I've sent you. And so really it comes down to, at this point, does the board feel comfortable with a project of doing something like that, and do you want to move forward with the next phase of doing an RFP? Dave and I have talked about an RFP. We've looked at a lot of different templates. The ones we've looked at, they're not real sophisticated. They're about a 3-page RFP where it's what size of, here's the size of system we're looking for, here's the parcel of land we want to have it on. We work with Mark on some of the legal stuff, but obviously the warranties and those things would be in there. So we may, we feel comfortable, we probably could do the RFP ourselves. Maybe we have someone review it if we need to and send it out. The piece that you run into if you have one of the developers or a developer that specializes in that do the RFP and write the specs, then you probably need to preclude them from bidding on the bid. And so you're gonna lose a potential developer that's their sole business is utility scale systems from being able to bid on RFP because they've designed the system. So we don't want that conflict of interest there. So we would look at a different avenue to do that. And there's 3 or 4 solid utility scale systems, even in the state of Minnesota, that we would anticipate would be bidding on a system like that. We get Minnesota Solar, Ziegler is in there. There's a couple other ones in there. So we think we'd get some good responses from people that have a good track record. Obviously, we talk about references and all those types of things in RFP, but you guys would see that before anything went out. So that would be the approach that we take, would be a formal RFP, just from a legal aspect of being a municipal utility and how we have to approach a project. So I'll stop with that. And just entertain questions, thoughts, timing. Again, there isn't a big timing issue. If we're not going to do a PPA structure, there's no timing as far as tax incentives. So it could be something, we could start the RFP this fall for installation in the spring. There is really no time constraint. We're looking to self-fund something ourselves, so that's a constraint that the board doesn't have to worry about. think we'd recommend putting in an installation in the winter time. You know, you might as well wait till spring and capture the summer output right away from that. So timing isn't an issue. Tax incentives wouldn't necessarily be an issue if we're gonna self-fund it ourselves. We wouldn't have to worry about, you know, the sunsetting provision of the renewable tax credit, which goes from 26% this year to 22, and then 18 and down unless they renew it through the federal government, which they're talking about. But that wouldn't really come into play if we're just gonna do our own project as well. So that would eliminate some of those questions there. Thoughts, questions on a solar array?
I like the idea myself. I think it's something we should move forward with, at least continue going with.
Yeah, I also like the concept and continue to refine it. I think we have to have those conversations today, start the conversations today, and Jeremy can carry it forward from there. But big picture wise, it's something I think that we should move ahead on. We're a bit long on power, I think, right now, right, Jeremy, on supply. So oversizing the development, I don't think is anything that's really logical for us to do, because we're not searching for supply right now. So I do understand why right sizing that down is important and the right thing to do. The question I asked Jeremy on an email that he had a nice answer for, and I'll let him answer it again. But I said, is there any reason that we need to move ahead now with a 650 sized development without having done the survey to the ratepayers to find out if there's a small or large interest in subscribing? And by doing the survey first, then sizing the development, and then moving ahead into construction, would that save on development costs or anything like that? And Jeremy, I'll let you provide the answer that you have.
Yeah, so really, a couple things. I mean, my response was, you could certainly do it that way. If that's a decision the board wants to do, is, hey, let's just wait, let's get some feedback from the community, and then see if we want to size this a little bit bigger than just enough for the ED in the city. That's certainly one option. The piece that Dave and I talked about is, the nice thing about sizing it to start with the project for the city and EDA is, now you've got something visible there, right? You can market that, you can communicate that stuff to the customers. They can visually see things if they want to. You know, we can promote that, and then we can say, hey, now we're looking to provide a community solar array where we're going to add on, and is there interest in that? And so you've got some of that visibility component of that. The piece for us is, we're going to learn on this project, just our staff, just as the developers coming in and doing that. So we're going to be able to glean a lot of the installation process, how that's working. And so if we do want to add on, essentially all we'll be looking to do is buy the materials. And so we can do that through some different avenue channels and then do the installation ourselves. And so there's a learning component that I think is also helpful for just doing the large scale system first, by the developer with the warranties and making sure that we understand how that works, and then adding on. So you can phase in approaches without really any additional costs or additional mobilization from contract, because we would anticipate doing those small scale systems ourselves. So there's potentially some benefit to doing it that way as well. From that, we did look at that solar array relative to, which is another topic on here, the Bright Energy Choices program. And you can mirror those two programs if you wanted to together. You could have them be separate programs. You could mirror a community solar to be price competitive to the Bright Energy Choices and give customers different options on what they would choose. And so there's a whole host of getting the one system in first, getting some feedback from the community, doing a couple town hall meetings, and then seeing how much interest there is. Of course, most of the time when I've talked with different utilities and different general managers and different people that have got community solar gardens, and they all say the same thing. If you want high penetration of subscriptions, it's got to be price competitive. And so we could sit and talk all day about different types of structures and programs, but that's another conversation point you can have based on how the first array comes in and how price competitive that is. You know, once we get RFPs back, we can say, hey, this is really what the cost of kilowatt hours is. Now, how competitive can the community solar be relative to that, or to the Bright Energy Choices? So it gives you some additional phased approaches that you could take incrementally and work specifically on those programs versus having that all included at once. But there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It just depends on the process that you'd want to go. Obviously, the phased approach, you don't have to worry about excess right away or minimal excess. If you add on a portion of it into the solar array right away, or or you wait and you see, you may have a little bit of excess community solar garden output versus the big array. So, I mean, there's minimal risks either way, depending on how you want to run an operation, but. So,
Yeah, I was surprised, happily surprised with the cost structure. I mean, it's come down considerably over the last few years as far as, what the cost of power is gonna be and the benefits of self-funding it versus, having an outside partner is pretty apparent, I think, right away.
Yeah, that evolved in a hurry. I was really surprised how dramatic of a drop the costs took when we self-funded versus
I agree.
Yeah, it makes the project
viable.
very, yeah. So, to me, it's a project I think it's well worth doing, and the work you put in so far, I think, shows that, at least to me, it makes sense for us to continue down the path of getting that firm pricing and finding out, exactly what we're looking at. One question I would have is, so at the beginning, when we're getting that request for pricing and they're designing the whole project, is there a certain size they'd be designing it for? If we're gonna add on later, is there a maximum, size component to this?
No, so we've talked a little bit about that because, well, when you talk about size, I'm thinking of two different things: the size of the solar array output itself, and the size of the panels, right? So different technologies have different size panels. Some are 24 by 48 inches, some could be 24 by 24. But I think how we would design it, again, we know how much acreage is up there on that one parcel. It's close to 4 acres, and we already know, we've had both of them provide us a revised 600 to 700 kW system, a ballast system or a standalone system that can fit on that property. And so they've all said, yep, for that size of acreage, we can for sure get that. That's not gonna be a problem putting that type of output on there. I think there's gonna be some additional space left on that particular lot. The other piece that we have, if we wanna use our property, let's say we want to expand that over time and just keep adding small sections onto that, because we decide to have more programs or whatever, we've got that, in my mind, we've got that space between where the solar array, the original large system would go, and our power plant. That would be plenty of space right next to it that you could fit a couple additional additions on to that without having to go into a second or third spot in the EDA. And the only reason I say that is the more spots, different locations you go, there's more connection points, which means there's a little bit more incremental cost for us to connect to each one of those solar arrays. Not huge costs, but every connection point you have, there's a little bit more additional infrastructure that we would have to provide. And typically what you see in most solar arrays is we would write the specification where the developer would be responsible for all the costs incurred up to our connection point, and we would be responsible for the infrastructure, so the feeder and the junction box that would feed to that piece. So that would be how we're originally thinking about designing the system, as when we RFP, hey, you're responsible up to the transformer, we're from the transformer back. Some places will say, hey, you gotta include in your pricing your transformer, the 3-phase conductor, and all that, but we can get that stuff cheaper than a developer can, because we're in the utility business, so it doesn't make sense for them to add that into their bid. We would take that on as our cost from the transformer back, and they would just be responsible up to that connection point. So there's some advantages of doing that as well.
Questions,
The
comments?
questions I had got covered already, so in my meeting with Jeremy, it made sense. I originally thought the customer survey would be first, but I think it makes sense either way.
It's a
So,
logical response.
yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Sometimes it's easier to sell something when people can see it.
Yeah.
So,
As long as that additional 40 or 50 kilowatt next phase doesn't void any warranties and the bigger one and so on.
Right.
So, well, over the last 5 years, the cost has come down significantly, you'd said.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens over the next couple more years? Is it gonna continue to go down, or are we, it's about where it's gonna be?
Well, I've heard, there's two ends of the spectrum, right? One says, yeah, as technology evolves, it's gonna continually come down, and then the other side says, this technology is down about as good as, you're down to $1.25 a watt from $5. It's pretty hard to make the materials that much cheaper, and so you hear the other end of the spectrum, so.
I think if you right size it today, you almost hedge for that cost going down again in the future too.
Right.
If we're gonna add, another 200 in the future, say, and it does get cheaper, well, we've experienced or taken advantage of that too.
Right.
So,
Because we've cost out of, when we first started this, when I first started, we actually talked about a solar array in a community. Back then, we were looking at a subscription-based model where it was about $800 to $1,000 a panel for a person to buy one. Right now, with the quotes that we've just gotten, we've looked at it, they're down to about $188 a panel for a panel. So when we looked at a price point on that, so we actually did, if we ran a subscription-based model, I had Dave crunch the numbers because I think it's important just to give you just a ballpark figure on that. At $188, even at $200 a panel, that's more, even if you said, hey, you're gonna provide the option of a customer buying the panel or paying for it over time. A lot of people, there may be people that go, you know what, for $188 and I can get a 22% tax credit on my income tax return, I can upfront $180 versus $1,000. So you may get people that say, I'm willing to buy it up front. The other option is just to add an adder on to their retail rate and have them pay it over time. But we're looking at really a payback at that price point of about 8 to 10 years for someone if they buy a panel, that after that 8 to 10 years of paying that panel off, then the incremental power that's produced by that would be a reduction on their bill. And so it used to be 15 to 20 years on the price point of panel, where then you look at, okay, this panel's gonna last 25 years is what they say, so I'm only gaining some cost savings the last 5 years, where now I can get it down to that 8 to 10 because the pricing of the materials has come down. Where it may make more sense for people that are interested in doing that to do that. So it just kind of shows you kind of where the price has come on the materials side of things with the production. Of course, one piece we gotta keep in mind is a lot of stuff is made overseas as well, depending on some of the developers. And there may be some slowdown in logistics and things with COVID going on. Some of it's made over here in the United States, and so just, you may run into some of that through the RFP process, but we would sift through that and talk about that stuff as we move along. So there's plenty of options. It just depends on really the comfort level of the board and where they'd like to go.
I just had one last kind of fundamental question. Jeremy, most municipal utilities that have gone into the solar arrays have done it through a developer, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And in this case, we're not really talking about using a developer other than for the design and construction of the project. What makes us think, or why are you comfortable going ahead without using a developer for the overall project and doing some of it internally?
Well, so for the large array, we'd use a developer. It's only if we add on the small scale system where we do that ourselves.
But what, and I guess then spin my question a little bit different angle then. Why wouldn't another municipal utility downsize their solar array to a point where they wouldn't need a developer? Why does everybody do a megawatt or more, whereas we're looking at doing something smaller? Why didn't they do the math? Or are we missing something?
No, I think there's two fundamental things there. So most municipal utilities typically won't do a large scale utility scale system. One reason, so I'll just take the state of Minnesota, most municipal utilities in the state of Minnesota are full requirements of a wholesale supplier. So they're not gonna put in their own utility scale system themselves because their wholesale supplier is doing it on behalf of them.
And they really can't because they're contract.
Right, in their contracts, so most of the full requirement utilities, at least in our membership, they can only have 5% of their sales be in renewables. That's all they will allow. So most of them are just depending on the wholesale supplier to do all that for them. We're unique in this, from the standpoint of we're not a full requirement utility. We don't operate predominantly like most municipal utilities in the state of Minnesota. The other piece that comes into play is because municipal utilities aren't required by legislation to put in renewables and to have those as part of laws and guidance, they choose not to do that because it's typically more cost prohibitive to do that than it is just buying wholesale power from their wholesale supplier. So typically the big utility scale systems that you see are more investor-owned utilities because they're required to by state law to meet certain renewable standards at certain timeframes and years. And so a lot of the municipals that have solar arrays were ones that were put in several years ago, and that's why they scaled into more of a community solar array because they were more expensive back then. Some utilities don't have cash reserves or in a financial position to put up a solar array of this type of size. Some don't have quite the different relationship that we have with EDA in the city, that some, that we have, that some don't have that. So there's a whole host of reasons why you're not typically seeing that on the municipal side, but predominantly most municipal utilities
Full requirement.
are full requirement and they go through wholesalers, so.
Which makes sense.
And we're not that way, so, I mean, I've always said we operate like an investor-owned utility, just on a smaller scale. We do exactly the same thing they do. You guys, they have to go through the PUC for regulatory stuff. You guys are the regulatory body here. And so you have a lot more flexibility to do things than most municipal utilities do. So from that particular standpoint, they just don't choose, they're just not in that business model. So it does provide opportunities and flexibility for you guys to do different things here that a lot of municipals don't have. And again, the smaller utilities, they don't have the financial resources to even put up a 60 kW system. They're living as soon as they bill out. I mean, they're living on 30, 60 days cash, and so any of those things that they would like to do, they're just not in a position to do that, nor are they in a position to want to raise retail rates to accommodate that. So you see a lot of variation in that.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Great question too. Something looks like it's a really good deal. You always wonder if you're missing something. So,
We're just different.
yeah,
In a good way.
In a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
right. All right, so it sounds like you're getting a consensus from us that we'd like to proceed.
Yep.
Get the request for pricing and keep going down that road.
Okay.
All right, another discussion item on the agenda is the Great Energy Choices program.
So this is the one we kind of talked about. I should say it's called, just so we're all clear, it's called Bright Energy Choices. Not great, so Bright Energy Choices. So essentially it's a program that a wholesale supplier provides. And we've talked about this in the past, and we've talked a little bit about it at the strategic planning meeting last year as well. Where the wholesale supplier on behalf of their members, we're a member, we're not a full requirement, but we're a member, we can take advantage of this program. Some programs we can't because we're not full requirement, but this one, they'll allow us to take advantage of. Essentially what it is if we have customers in town that either want to be 100% renewable or 100% carbon-free, they can become that. And so what happens is, for the amount of kilowatt hours that they would need to make that happen, we would submit those kilowatt hours on an annual basis to MRES, and they would essentially buy RECs, renewable energy credits, that basically signify that the amount of kilowatt hours coming to you from HUC through MRES are renewables, and they'd have certifications or certificates that you get that validate that it came from a wind farm, came from a solar farm, it came from some renewable source for that. So they've been running that. There's quite a few municipal utilities involved in that. Detroit Lakes, they've got some customers on it. Marshall Utilities has some customers on it. I've talked with Brad Rose down there about some of that. So I think we've got, at least within the MRS membership, there's about 4 or 5 utilities that have started that program. And so right now, the upcharge or the auction, they're basing the charge that they're adding on to our rate is based on what they can get the renewables for on the auction. So for this year, for 2020, it's a half a cent adder onto the kilowatt hours that essentially we're buying. So what we've talked about in the past is most utilities that are on the program are just passing through that half a cent to the customer. So if a customer says, hey, I want to be 100% renewable, for that additional amount of kilowatt hours that they have to buy, they apply a half a cent onto that. So if a resident wants to be 100% renewable, it may cost them another extra $5 a month to be all renewable versus just getting the power supply mix that we have. Every utility is a little bit different depending on what their makeup is. Some municipal utilities have more renewables than others because they may have some hydro in their power supply mix that we don't have. We don't get WAPA or hydro allocation like a lot of the members do, and so we lose out on some renewables there that a lot of people have. Some of the smaller utilities are already 100% renewable because all their power is coming from hydro and wind, and so they don't need to roll out a program to their customer base. So right now with our program, and I sent you guys that power supply mix, I think maybe a month or two ago, we're about, I think, 71% carbon free and 7% renewable. So if someone in our service territory says, hey, I want to be 100% renewable, we would go out and get them 93% of the kilowatt hours that they typically would use in a year through this Bright Energy Choices program, and then we would add that half a cent on for that. I did mention one of the customers was looking at doing that out in the park out there, and they've come back and said they do want to start that program, and they would like to do it in 2020 already. They've gotten confirmation from their leadership team that they want their mission and goal is to be 100% renewables and sustainable at all their facilities, and so they would like to start that this year. I said I would talk with you guys about that piece, but we've had a few residential customers also inquire about, what's HUC doing as far as providing some additional renewables or some different avenues where I can become more green or more carbon free, right? That's the buzzword out there, is becoming more carbon free or more renewable. So one, we've talked about the solar array and doing a community solar program that would help in that instance, but this one is also one that you could institute immediately and roll out in some capacity to provide that as an option right away. From our standpoint, administratively, very easy to submit. We would just submit how many kilowatt hours someone used the previous month. We would send that to MRS, and they would bill us the following month for that half a cent times over kilowatt hours.
So is it very flexible from a month-to-month basis then? Or do you have to lock in for a period of time?
We asked the question, you have to be in for the year. And the only reason, because I asked the question, can someone come on and go off? And they said, you can on an annual basis. And the only reason for the annual basis is because they're buying the RECs yearly. And so if you're in, let's say someone starts this year, fourth quarter, you probably need to be in through this fourth quarter and next year. They don't want people falling off. They've recommended people not falling off. Now, with that said, they've also said we're able to kind of float with our own finances here if someone just doesn't want to be involved anymore, but they're trying to limit people from coming on, going off, because they have to weigh the option to buy these renewable energy certificates on a yearly basis. So they want to avoid that, but if someone's in a bad spot and just say, hey, I can't afford, I don't want the renewables anymore, can you remove me? They're willing to work with us on that. So it's very flexible from that standpoint. And they're always billing us for actual kilowatt hours, not estimated. And so that's a good thing from a customer standpoint and for us, because what would happen is MRES would, on their monthly bill to us, they would have that half a cent added on for the Bright Energy Choices program, and then we would make sure on our end that the customers that participated in that program, that we would recapture that half a cent that goes back to them. So we would essentially just be collecting it and passing it back through to MRES for that.
So we would just really have a small administrative time and cost.
Right, very minimal.
Would you say that this competes with or complements the proposed solar project?
I think it can complement the solar project if you want to create a solar project, a community solar project that's competitive to the Bright Energy Choices program. So they can complement each other. If you're going to create a solar program or a community solar garden where it's more expensive, significantly more expensive for someone to partake in buying a panel locally versus just buying RECs through the wholesaler, then you probably are competing against that one, right?
At the proposed price points, if these hold on the solar development, we'd be kind of competing at a similar price point, right?
We would be.
But would, say, a large general user in the industrial park, they would likely rather pay a half cent adder to do Bright Energy Choices than invest in a subscription and that, because it's a bigger cash outlay, right?
That, and I think, yep.
Because of the size of their consumption.
Correct, because if you get someone that's, wants to be 100% renewable and it's a large general customer, we're not gonna be able to put up enough solar, we're not gonna have enough land to put up that many panels for
So
our large customers.
this could be, our solar development could be for smaller users, and the Bright Energy could cater to the larger.
That's probably
That makes
ideally
sense.
how you'd want it, just for the sheer size of being able to, not be able to, you know, we don't have land to put up 1,000 panels because this company wants to be.
Right.
And it's a huge cash outlay for us or them to
Right.
do
This
this.
gives them flexibility, I know, for the users.
And when we look at the glide paths we're on and where we're at, I mean, when we talked about the 0.5% with the large general customer, that cost wasn't even a concern because our rates are so competitive that 0.5% wasn't even an issue for them. It was more, do we want to be carbon free or renewable free? That was their biggest conversation point at the leadership group, is where do we want to be? So the price point at the 0.5% isn't a big issue. And when what they actually told us too, the way the auction prices are looking right now for renewables, they're maybe anticipating even next year's program at being 0.3% is where they're seeing the auction prices right now. So that pricing is going to fluctuate a little bit. It's not going to be a static 0.5% if they can get it cheaper, which renewables are coming down. We're pretty large scale, that might even be more competitive than half. So it's an easy program to administer. And it really is an easy program to administer for everyone if you wanted to be that large, or you wanted to open it up to the residential customers as well. But I would say, back to your point, Anthony, I would say generally speaking, the business sector is probably more in line to take advantage of the Bright Energy Choices program because of the sheer scale of kilowatt hours that they'd be looking to do it for. And that's more of a lot of those companies isn't necessarily about cost savings, it's about corporate goals and missions and sustainability and moving that direction, right? So they're doing it for sometimes a different reason than maybe some residential customers would be. So there's maybe a little bit different philosophy there. But it's certainly an easy program to administer.
I'm all right moving ahead on it, there's no downside to us.
Right? I mean, I think it's just it's a benefit of an offering, you know, for people to achieve what they want to, and we can facilitate that. I don't see why we would.
I look at it as a service to the community.
Right?
You guys on board with just passing through whatever that rate adder is to the customers?
The alternative is we pay it and spread it across all ratepayers.
Or we charge a little bit extra. But I
Only-
don't see why you would just pass it along.
I think,
That's what I
think if you
would
just
use.
call it an adder, it probably simplifies it in case the auction prices fluctuate every year. You'd probably just call it an adder, I think.
Right.
I'd have to follow your recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I don't think you want to, I hate to use the word subsidize, I don't think you want to do that because then other ratepayers are paying for that program. So I think the best
Right.
approach is just to pass the adder on.
Because if you don't pass it on, then what's stopping everybody from signing up? You know, if it doesn't cost them anything extra.
Yeah, right, that's right. Everyone will sign up and I'll be all 100% renewable and it doesn't cost me anything, right?
And so yeah, I think we proceed.
Agreed.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Consensus on that one too? All right, one more item on the agenda, the electric and natural gas glide path discussion.
So I sent you out some kind of revised numbers following the glide paths that we're already on. Okay, just to recap, had the cost of service study done back in 2017 based on 2016's actual data. At that point, the board wanted to follow basically a 6-year glide path on the electric division side and a 9-year glide path on the natural gas division side. And again, really the precipitous of the glide paths was to make sure every rate class is paying their fair share of the cost of running the utilities, the distribution transmission systems, and the upcharging or upsizing of systems, particularly pertinent to certain customers. And so we kind of followed that approach. I think the board at that point wanted it to be more of a long-term, minimal impact approach. That's why we got to the 6-year and the 9-year glide path. Back in, I think, 2018, the board adopted the first 2 rate adjustments that went into effect October of 18 and October of 19. We talked a little bit about it last year at the strategic planning meeting. I mentioned to you a couple months ago that if the commission wants to keep moving down those glide paths and rebalance all the customer classes, that we would need to have some conversation about that here shortly, so that if we wanted to stay on the same implementation date of October 1st of a particular year, that we're ahead of that, because it also needs to go to the city council for their blessing or for their ability to veto any rate adjustment changes if they so choose. And so what I put together is essentially kind of giving you what the cost of service rates were back then, where our rates have been, and then in the box is what the proposed rates for the next 2 years would be, for you guys, so you could see how those glide paths keep moving forward. And so I gave you kind of an overall table of those, both for the electric rates and the natural gas rates. I gave you the general impacts to the residential and small general customers. I know that was a conversation point that came up a while, back when we originally did the 2-year implementation rates, was what type of impact are we looking at for the different customers from that regard. And then the last couple pages, which was a critical point back then as well, is at that point the board said, yep, we want to start rebalancing our customer classes, making sure they're equitable, but we want to stay revenue neutral or close to revenue neutral. We don't need to generate any more additional revenue at this point based on our financial condition and where we're at. So those last couple of pages are basically showing you if you implemented rates for 10/1/2020 and 10/1/2021, what the projected rates would be with the proposed rates. And so you can see they mirror, and if you go back to the old cost of service information in the last 2 years that were implemented, you'll see these follow similar to those types of cost changes, and then also percent changes from a customer class standpoint from that regard. A couple other kind of important pieces. When we went through the original cost of service study, the contracted customers, we did not adjust them at that point because they were under contractual agreements that the board approved. If you guys recall, just more recently, you guys did approve the revised contracts for our 2 contracted customers on the natural gas side, where we did follow the cost of service study. So you can see with the natural gas, at least in that first year, you can see that their rates have increased. And again, within those contracts, we broke up transmission and distribution, so it was transparent, not only to the board here, but also to the customers, what those rates are covering. So you can see that increased for those 2 contract customers going into next year, part of this year and all next year. So you can see the impact there. Again, with those customers, since we're at the cost of service study for them now, that's one thing that would have to be a consideration for you guys, if you're only looking to adjust the rate for 2 more years and then redo the cost of service study. You probably don't need to adjust the contracts when they come up here on an annual basis, which is what we have those agreements on, because they're at the cost of service study now, and they're paying, at least based on the cost of service study, their share of the distribution and transmission facilities that we have in place and the maintenance. So you can see the impact there. The other piece on that front page, particularly in the residential customer for both the electric and the natural gas side, I've got an alternate rate. And so that's a conversation point for you guys as well. When you look at the 10/1/2021 rate, let's say for the electric rate, you can see the monthly charge goes to $16.90 if you follow the normal glide paths. Well, the cost of service study said we only need to charge a rate of $14.35. That's the cost of service rate. And so what I'm showing in these alternate rates is if the board doesn't want to go above the cost of service rate on the monthly charge, the alternate rate would be keeping it at the previous year's monthly charge, but then adjusting the energy rate. Essentially giving you the same effect of moving the residential class a hair or picking up a hair more of their fair share, but then you're not going over the cost of service monthly charge. You can decide to do it either way if you wanted to. If you wanted just to follow the proposed rates and move the monthly charge to $16.90 and a lower energy rate, you could. But if you don't want to go above the cost of service rate, then I'm giving you the other alternate that gives you the same effect. The only downside, I guess, or the only caveat to that piece is if you look at the residential rates for 10/1/2020, and you have a monthly charge of $14.30 and then an energy rate of a little over 8 cents. In order to keep the residential moving down the glide path that we want, you have to increase the energy rate the next year if you're going to keep the monthly charge the same. But it gives you another option to consider. Again, from a timing standpoint, kind of mentioned in the email, it probably works well. I mean, if you guys want to consider, again, you consider to do nothing as well too, and that's a consideration you guys have too. But if you want to institute 2 more years, have that approved, then that is good timing, because what happens is it comes around into 2022, which when we've put budgets together, the board has said, every 4 to 5 years, we want to have an updated cost of service study done, because we want to see that, hey, we're at where we need to be based on where our operations are and what's going on. So that would be good timing for 2 more rate implementations. We get into 2022, which means we do a cost of service study sometime in the spring or the summer of 2022, which would be on 2020's actual data. So it would be 2021's actual data. So it would be 5 years removed from the actual data we used in 2016. So the timing fits well for an additional 2-year rate adjustment, and it fits well within a new cost of service study done moving forward. So not that you have to do 2 years, you could do a year, and decide you want to move up the cost of service study or whatever you want. I mean, the timing is flexible there. It just depends on the comfort level of the board and where they want to be. But at least I'm giving you the idea of where the rates need to go on the glide paths, that we're staying revenue neutral, that it's just adjusting the classes based on what at least was the perceived opinion of the board 2 years ago. So I don't know, I'll stop there. I don't know if there's any questions on any of the data. I did also provide you the average customer classes, or the average, at least in the residential customers, that was a big thing, of where the residential customers fall as far as kilowatt hours and MCF usage. That was a bigger conversation point last time, because 95% of our customers are residential customers. And so I didn't update this one. I did look at our latest numbers, 3 years removed, and we've added 100 residential customers. So but the numbers are still fairly the same as far as usage, so I didn't update that one. But you can see how the usage is different for the different number of customers and the different buckets of energy usage. So that's a lot.
What does the commission think?
I'm not aware of any reason to vary from the course we set a couple years ago. I haven't heard anything or seen anything that makes me think that we shouldn't do another 2 years on the proposed rate changes on the same glide path we talked about. I also think it's logical to have another cost of service study done in 2022.
I would agree with you on that. I think that's one of the reasons we did that cost of service study, was to give us a path to follow. And why not follow it?
Unless there's a reason to consider otherwise, I think.
Yeah.
I think we're achieving exactly what we had set out to do. And to take the next 2-year chunk and then reevaluate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's perfect. So.
Any thoughts on the residential side, the proposed rate schedule for 10/1/2021 versus the alternate rate? Do you guys have any major concern about the monthly charge? I can tell you from when we did this last time, and I think I provided you guys the data of where people's monthly charges are at and the average, and even the cost of service at $14.35 was still below average. The average was about 15 to 20, and that was years ago.
Compared to our peer group, you mean?
Compared to our peer group. So even if you moved it to $16.90, that's still below average.
Yeah.
But that was a piece.
I think we stay on the glide path plan.
Mhm.
I think it's working. You know, it gets more of the revenue coming on the fixed charge. We have less fluctuation, which is one of the things that we wanted to achieve out of all of that as well. You know, to have better plan, you know, our revenue streams along with it without increasing the cost to the customer. So I think we stick to it.
And in 2 years, we'll know
Right.
if we need to do something different. So that would be, the answer would be alternate then, right? Or excuse me, stick on the glide path.
Stick on the glide paths.
Right. That's what I think. Bob?
I'd say the glide path, yeah.
Agree.
We have
So then-
consensus there too?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll plan the next meeting in August, bring back, we did a resolution last time, have you guys adopt the next 2 years. And then I would anticipate going in front of the council, and Mark and Matt, and I can work through, I think the process we did last time is I went, the first council meeting of the month, kind of went through the materials, talked about what we've talked about, the cost service and the glide path, and then they had the second council meeting in September to take action or not. Barring any vetoing or action, then we would implement them October 1st, and we would communicate that to the customers and what that's about there. So, Mark, I don't know, is there any different time frame that you're thinking of?
Nope, I think that's exactly how we did it last time, and it should work this time as well.
Okay.
All right. Sounds like a plan. That takes care of the agenda. Anything else, Jeremy?
That's it.
It's a pretty heavy agenda. Nice job to you and your staff.
I do have one
This is
question I
pretty
should
big
go back to
topics.
for clarification. Just to make sure I'm clear on it. So when we talked about the Bright Energy Choices program, and sounds like you guys are okay moving forward. Are we doing that just for the commercial, for the business customers, for all customers? Your thoughts on that? I should be clear, I should make sure I'm clear on that, so that if we market something, roll it out, we know.
No downside to either, right? I mean, more options generally are better. Just the only downside would be possible competition with on the consumer side on our proposed solar project subscription. But the fundamentals of what we're moving ahead with on the solar side are not hinging on residential users subscribing. So I don't think we're out anything by rolling into both commercial and.
I don't think so either. Now, let's kind of play this out. So if we do a larger array, if we ever get to that point where that's going to probably happen in the spring, I would anticipate, right? And then the second phase of a community solar, we have to go through the survey. That probably won't happen until next summer, fall, right? If you add on. So by that time, even if someone subscribes now, if they wanted to change into a different, I'd rather have something in solar locally, they could get up by the end of 2021 out of the Bright Energy Choices into a panel. So I don't think there's any real risk either from a customer switching or wanting to do both too, so.
Right. I don't see a problem with offering it full.
Just it's a matter of educating the consumer, the differences.
Yeah.
Giving them a choice.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's clear, because we want to make sure we're marketing it to
Right.
the right people, right?
Yeah. So yeah, roll it out fully.
Great, thank you.
You're up. Motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, motion by Bob, second by Matt to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.